Greetings, everyone. Dr. Brian Scott with you today. Another new week in the month of March, another new week of podcasts. And I thank you for joining me here on Insight to the End Times. We've been sharing for almost a full 3-year period where we might be on God's timetable as we're approaching the end of the age. And even in the 3 years that we've been sharing this, we're getting closer, obviously. But we're also seeing world events occurring which are fulfilling more and more of the prophetic scriptures in the Bible. We've examined Old Testament prophecy, prophetic scriptures there. We've been examining the ones in the New Testament. We've been examining what Jesus said in so many of his parables and also in his chapters like Matthew 24 and Luke 21, and also all the things that are referred to in the book of Revelation to see where we are on this timetable. And of course, all we can really say is we're getting really, really close. We're in the book of 2 Timothy chapter 3. Paul's written to Timothy, and he has said to Timothy, in the last days, perilous times are coming. We've examined what last days means. It means the very last of the last port. There's no further deliveries to be made. That's the very last delivery. And we've also examined what the word perilous means. It's extremely dangerous times. It's only used twice in the scriptures. The other reference besides 2 Timothy 3:1 is where Jesus is describing the madman of Gadara who has 6,000 demons in him and is so strong and so wild that he breaks off chains and shackles and everybody's afraid of him, and Jesus casts all those demons out of him and they go into a herd of swine and over the cliff and into the sea and they drown. So it's pretty wild stuff. And these perilous days are really going to be wild days. Well, in chapter 3, verse 2, on Friday, we began looking at some of the signs. There's about 25 signs here in this chapter. And the very first sign is people will become lovers of self. Well, we examined the fact that, hey, that's not a bad thing, because Jesus told us the first commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all of your being. And then the second commandment is like the first commandment. He says you're to love your neighbor as you love yourself. So he's telling us loving ourselves is a starting point for us to be able to love our neighbor. But what's happened in these perilous times we're living in is we're loving ourselves and we're forgetting to love our neighbor. So our interest is self-centered, self-focused, self-absorbed in what's best for me, myself, and I. Now, that's not to say that everybody is in that sphere, but I do want to suggest to you that a majority of people really have gone overboard, and we follow a lot of those people. Remember, we talked the other day about the changes that have occurred in technology, and we used to have phones on the wall that we dialed 7 digits to make a phone call. Or we had a phone that had push button and we pushed the buttons. That's how I started my law career, with a phone that had push buttons. And then we got a phone that had not only push buttons, but it had the ability to have 5 different lines connected to it. That was really cool.
Hey, this is Matt from Insights to the End Times. I wanted to interrupt just for a quick moment and ask you to do us a huge favor. If you could go ahead and hit the like, share, or subscribe button, it would allow us to make sure that you stay up to date with all the latest videos from Dr. Scott. Now back to the episode.
Then we came along with some portable phones, cell phones, and they were very, very introductory level. All they could do was phone and receive a call, like make a call, phone, and receive a call. And then they developed into, maybe the next phase would be the BlackBerry, for instance, which had a lot of ability to do things beyond make calls. And then we got into the Apple phones and the Samsung phones and the Google phones and all the other things. And these little phones today, they're walking computers. They have so much they can do. It's just overwhelming, really overwhelming. So, but here's the problem. Do you notice when you go out, say into a restaurant, and people are seated there in the restaurant and they almost all have their phone up and they're all on their phone, and it's like, are you texting each other across the table? There's hardly any communication anymore because we're using phones to communicate, texting. emails, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this lover of self has really shifted gears, and we're so self-absorbed with it. I want to take you in a set of scriptures that I found very interesting as it pertains to this, and maybe I'm stretching to draw a point here, but at least let me share this with you. In Matthew chapter 25, this is the chapter right after the apocalyptic chapter, the end time chapter, Matthew 24. Jesus shares some very powerful parables here. The parable of the 10 virgins, 5 wise, 5 foolish. Then he shares about the parable of the talents, where men are servants of the master are given funds to go out and do business. And then he comes back and he asks for an accounting, which is really a parable highlighting our life as believers and what we're doing with the gifts and skills and talents God has given us, and he wants us to give an account. And if we haven't done too much with them, if we've been very, very quiet and not done too much, that's not a good point. The one talent man, he got kicked out. He had everything taken away from him. Not a good point. Well, we get a little further into that chapter, and we're dealing with what's called the judgment of the nations. And here's what it says, and I'm just going to look at a few of the verses. Matthew 25, starting in verse 31 through 46, but I'm going to start in verse 34. Hope I'm not confusing you. This parable of the nations runs from 31 to 46. I only want a couple verses to make a point. In verse 34, the king comes along and says to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, I want you to inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." So that's a pretty good thing. Whoever qualifies to be on his right hand, wow. In the reference here in the earlier verses, he's dividing people into sheep and goats. And the sheep are on his right hand, and the goats are on his left hand. And so he says in verse 34 to those on his right hand, the sheep, he says, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Verse 35, he begins to define why they get to come in. "I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me water or drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." So Jesus lists 6 different things that he throws out to indicate the standards that he's judging people by. In verse 40, he says, and the king answers and says to them, because they now have asked, "Wait a minute, how did we do that? How did we give you food? How did we give you water? How did we give you clothing? How did we do that?" And Jesus answered and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me." So let's paraphrase that a little bit. What Jesus is saying here is, I'm judging you, this judgment of the nations. I'm judging you as to what you did to bless me, and you blessed me when you blessed people. So if you blessed people who were hungry and gave them food, that blessed me. If you gave them water when they were thirsty, that blessed me. If you clothed them when they didn't have clothing, that blessed me. If you visited them when they were sick, that blessed me. So what you did in terms of you helping someone else, sharing with someone else, looking after someone else, that's what qualifies you as sheep. And that's why you inherit the kingdom, because you walked in love. You gave, you released, you blessed. Now, what are we examining here? Lovers of self. We're looking at people who have become self-absorbed, self-interested, self-driven, et cetera, and that's going to be one of the signs. The first sign, the most important sign pointing to perilous times, is how we're responding vis-a-vis ourselves, vis-a-vis other people. So let's read on in this parable, and we'll jump down to verse 41, following right after verse 40, obviously. But here he he shifts gears, and now he's talking about the left hand. And when he talks about the left hand, he says, depart from me, you cursed. Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. That's eternal hell. That's lake of fire. And then he explains why. He says, I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no water or no drink. I was a stranger. You didn't take me in. I was naked. You didn't clothe me. I was sick. You didn't visit me. I was in prison. You didn't come and see me. Wow. Verse 44. And they said, well, wait a minute. When did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, and we did not minister to you? And his answer in verse 45, assuredly, again, that's a pretty strong statement. Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And then he says, you are to go into everlasting punishment, verse 46. Folks, I don't know if you're drawing the same parallel as I am in this, but I'm looking at the practicality of these things. Are we seeing these things occur? And the answer is yes, we are. Because people are self-driven, self-interested, self-absorbed. What's good for me, myself, and I that's all I'm interested in. And so we see people everywhere who are in need. Well, what are we doing? Are we doing anything to help them? Are we doing anything to help them? We just have seen in the last couple months devastation occur in the United States from natural disasters. We saw the hurricanes hit the southern coastlines. It came up across some of the southern states. It hit states along the eastern seaboard like North Carolina and Georgia and so on. North Carolina was devastated. They were decimated with destruction. Absolute destruction. Here we are probably 3 months since that occurred. They're still trying to recover. You go to the West Coast and you have the absolutely overwhelming forest fires that have come down upon Los Angeles, the north side of Los Angeles, wiped out thousands and thousands of homes. People are homeless. They lost everything. And so what do you see occurring as a result? You'll see a newspaper article or an internet article that comes along and says, so-and-so has donated $1 million to this. So-and-so has donated $500,000 to this. And I've seen, I don't know, maybe a dozen people who have been recognized for doing this. My point is simply this. They had the ability to do it. They're very wealthy people. But when you got thousands and thousands of people who are homeless now, and they've lost everything, if this lover of self situation wasn't so embedded in our lifestyle, you would have everybody you could think of contributing towards getting them back on their feet. And I don't know the full extent of all of this. I may be speaking out of turn. But since I only see a few reports of a few celebrities who are doing this, how are these people going to make it? So as we said here, we got sheep who are giving water and they're giving food and they're giving clothing and they're giving a place to stay and they're visiting people and so on and so forth. And they're going into the kingdom. They're getting commended. But we have another group of people who are doing nothing to help other people, and they're kicked out and they're going into everlasting damnation. So what Jesus is really pointing out to us here is we've had a shift that's occurred. And the great commandment, the second great commandment, love others as you love yourself. Too bad we focused on the latter part of that. We're loving ourselves more than we're loving anybody else. Amen. It's just atrocious. And I want to bring it right down to something that's very, very practical. Have you noticed that people aren't quick to help out anymore? I've noticed in churches, as I've not only in our own home church, but in other churches that I've been in and ministered in and shared in and attended conferences in, that people are coming to service just as the service starts. So there's no time to interact with others. There's no time to find out how people are doing, no time to have conversations. And they are racing out the door when the meeting's over. And they're gone. So there's no time to interact once again. And when there's a special event going on, only a handful of people show up to help prepare for it. You might have maybe 10% of a church attendance or membership show up to help. The other 90%, no, they haven't got time for it. They're too busy. They got other things going on. I've also noticed that when it comes to comparing what they are interested in the world versus the church setting, where they go to church, they've got time for all these other things. They got time for sports and hobbies and shopping and goofing off and relaxing and relaxation and so on. But when it comes to a special church project, a building project, a cleanup project, a maintenance project, whatever it happens to be, there's a handful of core, but that's it. Because whether you know it or not, this spiritual weapon called lover of self has crept into our life. And it is decimating people and what they should do to look after things. It is absolutely unbelievable. But it's really occurring. It's occurring all the time. So these verses, Jesus said to those who wouldn't help others, he said, you're gone. And that is a sign of the perilous times we're living in. And it's real because it could be your response to things. Hallelujah. We've had a ministry going, personal testimony. We've had a ministry that's closing in on 40 years. And it doesn't matter what's actually happening and what kind of special event, things going on. There's a very small core group we can count on to help out, but the majority of folks never show to help us out. Why? They don't realize it, but this lover of self really has crept into their lifestyle. When we come back this week, we're going to get into the second one called Lovers of Money. And I got some great things to share with you there too. Call you blessed. See you then. Amen. Bye.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Insights to the End Times. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to get notified every time we release a new video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right over here. Now, if you'd like to catch the previous episode, you can do that right here, or the entire playlist is right above right here. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next episode of Insights to the End Times.